Hello, everyone. This is Driftwood Conversations, and I'm Hillary Sloan. Today, I'm speaking with Talor Stewart, a licensed architect calling in from a studio he built in Vermont. Talor serves clients all over the country, but what drew me to him isn't just what he designs, it's how he thinks, and how clearly his work is rooted in a heart-led path. Before architecture, Talor lived a bohemian, handmade life. He built West African-inspired hand drums, traveled, sold them through dozens of stores, and treated each drum like a vessel with its own personality. Eventually, he felt a deeper question rising. What's next? He went into a 2-year walkabout of sorts, searching not for a career ladder, but for a life that felt aligned with spirit, creativity, and real service. And then, like he says in this conversation, a light bulb went off. Of course, I'm going to be an architect. When he looked back, he could see the clues had been there all along. Talor is the author of Conscious Home Design, a book built on a simple premise. Our homes aren't just shelter. They can be among the most powerful tools we have for supporting the life we're trying to live. He's not interested in style wars or trend chasing. He's interested in universal principles, including research and in the small shifts people can make, even if they rent, live in a tiny space, or can't make many structural changes. In this conversation, we talk about why space affects behavior, what he calls the sunny window effect, and why relationships might be the most important design element of all. We also touched on something I didn't expect. Talor breaks relationships into giving, receiving, and reciprocal, and explores how a home can support all three forms of connection, even in a room as small as a bathroom. If you live in a small space, if you rent, if you're building on land, or if you're simply trying to make your home feel more aligned with who you are now, this episode offers real practical ideas. And it also offers a window into the mind of someone who's trying to stay awake to life while still living fully in it. Okay, let's drop in.
Sure. Hi, Hillary. I'm Talor Stewart. I'm a licensed architect. I'm talking to you today from my studio in Vermont that I built. I serve clients all over the country, coast to coast and top to bottom with my design work. But I also have a book that I wrote, Conscious Home Design, and it hit #1 in 7 countries, and people can get the value, because not everyone will hire an architect, but everyone could learn something. And so it's not really style focused, about opinions or preferences, or I like this style, I like that style, I like red, I like blue. It's more about the universal principles that we know from science actually help people live longer, happier lives. And so I wanted to really anchor it in some sort of universal principles that are applicable to all of us, no matter where we are. That's sort of my big message is, hey, even if you're living in a rental and you have no plans to change anything around, there's still little shifts you can do that have a big impact in terms of supporting your daily life. So that's really my work. Thanks for having me on the show. It's really nice to connect with you. I've listened to your episodes before, and I admire your lens that you see life through.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I started in April, and I've met the most amazing people. And thank you for reaching out to me.
Sure.
That's so important to me. How did you come to conscious design? How long have you been in architecture? And when did you start to think about it as improving lives?
Yeah, good question. So, I used to build drums. I used to live a very bohemian lifestyle where I was inspired by the hand drumming and dancing traditions of West Africa. And I designed a line of 9 wooden hand drums with natural skins secured with ropes that were based off of those traditions. And I sold those to stores. I had about 65 wholesale accounts, including Sam Ash music stores. They were my biggest buyer all across the Northeast, really from Chicago to Florida to Maine. That was really my territory. I also did shows and fairs and festivals, and I also sold out of the shop. It was just a small little cottage industry, 2,000 square feet in Vermont. I really liked the lifestyle. I liked the fun. I liked the interaction with other people. I liked the travel that it afforded me. I liked the idea of making something with my own hands and then going and selling it. And every time I would make a drum, it was like oftentimes I would make drums on request. The majority of the time I was making them because I would make a drum. I didn't know who the owner was, who was going to end up with this vessel, and I would just, as I was in the creative process, I would just pay attention to what sort of things came through me. Sometimes an idea, a sentence, a thought, a feeling, sometimes a song, would come into my mind in the process, and I was like, oh, okay, that's the flavor of this one, and I wouldn't actually name the drums. Before taking the market, maybe I should have, but in my own mind I had a name for each of the drums. It was like each one had that kind of a personality, and so it was very intimate, for me. I really enjoyed doing this. But after a while, it became very clear to me that although this was something I was so passionate and excited about, I knew that it wasn't going to be the focus of my whole life. I was still just in my early 20s when I was doing this. And so I sold the business, and then I went on a 2-year sort of walkabout, like just traveling and saying, okay, well, what's next? Taylor, what are you going to do? And I had a very spiritual outlook. I thought, well, maybe I'll go join an ashram and meditate for enlightenment, and find God, because I really, want to be in tune or in touch, with life, and sort of the what I feel is the creative intelligence behind everything that we see. But I also felt like that the life of a renunciant was not going to be very fulfilling for me. I wanted the richness of friends and family, and I wanted creative opportunities, and I wanted, to be able to travel and do things. So I realized I needed to stay in the world and engage somehow. And so I was just searching, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've got to, provide service, provide value to people. And suddenly the light bulb went off. After a couple of years, it was like, oh, of course, I'm going to be an architect. And I looked back through my life, and the clues were always there. It's just, I was surprised I never saw it sooner, but all these other things had taken up space in the foreground of my life. But I saw that, really the true foundation it was my destiny, sort of. It felt like it was my dharma, where my real life's work was to be an architect. I knew it was about helping people before I even, started, the profession. The service aspect of it was built in, baked into the mold. But at 25 years old, I went back to school to become an architect.
Where did you go? What school?
I went to the Boston Architectural College. It's in Boston on Newbury Street. It was one of the oldest colleges for architecture in the United States, and it was the first to teach women the profession, because it had been, it still is slightly male dominated, but it had been like exclusively the domain of men, so even back in the 1800s, they were allowing women to come and take classes there. So that was interesting. That's not why I went. I just, it's just a nice, anecdote about my school. I researched a number of schools, and the choices in Vermont were limited and not great, and so I had to move to the big city in Boston to study, and so that was quite an adventure, and I learned a lot. But what I found is that even how intentional architecture is, like architects we're a very thoughtful bunch. We really want to manifest, style, function, form, design, meaning. We want to have things fit and be a cultural, symbol. There's so much meaning baked into the work that we do. Even with all of that intention, I still felt like the buildings we were creating were largely unconscious, and I even was writing about this in college in my papers. And so the desire to create conscious design was with me from the beginning. And I always knew I was going to write a book. It's just, it actually took me 20 years to get it published because so if you had asked 25-year-old Talor, hey, what's your career trajectory? If you then my plan for my life in terms of the milestones and the markers that here's where I'll be at 30, here's where I'll be at 35, etc. Planned it all out. Life did not turn out that way exactly for me, and I don't know anyone actually who has been able to follow their own made up timeline for their life, because life is big and you kind of have to respond. You can make your plans, but you have to really adapt to what comes. And so it's actually pretty beautiful because I thought I would have a book out the door within 5 to 10 years, but it turned out that the message that I had took 20 years of experience and practice and study and research and continuing education and specialization for it to actually gel into a very concise methodology that I could share and boil it down. Because when I was writing the book, I had like a 50-page Google Doc that I had saved up from all of my notes and 3 a.m. brainstorms and old college papers and client testimonials and links to studies that had been done that I thought were of note and interest. And I was just looking at this nebula of data and like trying to figure out, how am I going to organize this stuff, and my editor said, why don't you take every unique idea or talking point and then put it on a 3x5 index card and lay it out on the desk and see if you can rearrange things so there's a story arc and there's a natural flow, there's a journey that you can track through. I said, that's a great idea, because not only does it get it out of the world of text, but it gets it into, geometry, a geometric spatial arrangement, and which is a great way for my mind to think and re-look at it. And what I found is that, first off, I was like, I've got 42 index cards here. Nobody wants to read a 42-chapter book on architecture. So boring. And my goal was not to create a textbook for young architecture students, nor, I'm not trying to teach anyone else to be an architect. I just wanted to create a bridge from the profession to the non-design community, so that someone with no experience at all, they don't know the difference between one wall and another, could read this book and go, aha, I got the big idea. Here is the essential, the diamond, that's of all the things that are there, this is the core issue that is the most relevant, and these are the things that I could do, because understanding, we all know about the mind-body connection, but understanding how the mind-body environment connection works and impacts us is, I believe, an essential life skill, just like knowing how to dress for the weather or knowing how to prepare a well-balanced, nutritious meal. And so I want to share that knowledge with everyone so they can just, sort of update the filter through which they see things, because we spend so much time, particularly in our homes. I wrote Conscious Home Design. We spend half our lives in our home. And some people are spending, 80% of their life in their home, especially if they're working from home. Our environment really does, whether we're aware of it or not, it's going to impact us, influence it. And it can either create friction or it can create flow. And so I just want to, let people sort of bring things into focus for people that haven't thought about it so much, because... Yeah, so that's sort of the journey and sort of my personal perspective and the attitude that I bring to it and why I'm showing up. So here it is, it's 25 years later, more than 25 years I've been in the profession. And so on this great podcast, I'm sharing, everything I've learned so far, with not everything, I mean, it's obviously, but sharing, crystallizing, a few of the real gems,
Well,
people.
I have a lot of questions for you.
Great. Bring them on.
So I'm just trying to think of the sequence so we can keep going deeper.
Sure.
Where did your spirituality come from? Do you have an age that you recognize that you were seeing things from a more holistic point of view?
Very personal question. I can tell you about it. I'm pretty clear on my spiritual sort of progress. Same as my architectural progress. As a child, as a young child, growing up, I remember, we moved a lot, and so we would end up in a new home, every once in a while, every couple of years. I never lived in one house or went to one school for more than 2 years, and frequently it was less than that. And so I remember one time moving into a new house on a nice little side street in a little suburban neighborhood, and there was a young boy. I was maybe, I don't know, 6 years old, 7 years old, something like that. And there was a young boy across the street outside playing. Maybe he was with his mother. But anyway, I went to go make a friend, and I went over there and I said, hi, and, talked to him. And the woman asked me, she said, what religion are you? As I guess maybe, I don't know. I'm too young to really know. I don't know if she was just making conversation or if she was trying to qualify me to see if I was, worthy of playing with her kid, if she wanted my influence around or something. But I remember looking at her and saying, I don't know, And so and she said, don't you know about Jesus or something? And I went home and I said, hey, Mom, what religion are we? She said, you're whatever you want. I said, who's Jesus? And she said, well, he was a healer, a spiritual man who lived a long time ago. I thought, okay, good. And that was good enough for me. I said, okay, great. I thought to myself, of course, the universe is alive, is aware, is intelligent, and there's love to be had there. Yes, there's an impersonal side of creation, like the laws, for instance, are physical laws of electricity and gravity, and these things aren't a system of justice. They're a system of structure, that create life. So there is a very impersonal, sort of almost cold, mathematical, calculated aspect of intelligent creation, but there's also a very personal side that is loving and is aware of each one of us as an individual. And for me, as a kid, I was just like, well, I don't think about air. It's there, but you just breathe it and get on with your life. You just do what you do. And so for me, God was like air. It was just this ever-present, invisible thing that you don't need to think about because you're here to live. And so that's the way I proceeded for the next bunch of years until probably in my 11, 12 years old, my tween years as a young male growing up and, rubbing up against the edges of the world, and I was starting to feel like I wanted to have more power, as my body is getting bigger and my brain was developing, I wanted more autonomy. I started feeling like I wanted more independence and power and that thing. So my initial actual explorations into spirituality were, how can I become stronger? How can I become more powerful? It was an access. It was like, is there some strength that I can draw from this? And so that began a journey throughout my entire teenage existence of exploring everything you could imagine from Christian, from Western and Eastern and Native American and Taoism and different flavors of Christianity and Christian mysticism and Indian stuff and New Age stuff and crystals and like witchcraft or paganism. I mean, I looked at everything that I could find. I was really interested in just this whole field. What happened to me, I guess, by the end of my teenage years, is none of these things felt right for me. Actually, I didn't find a religion that really resonated so much, but so many things happened that I was like, okay, that can't be a coincidence. This is proof that there's something else going on. And it came, I had so many coincidences that weren't coincidences happen, synchronicities in my life, like over and over and over again, that I was like, okay, something's going on here. It became very clear to me that not only is there a God, I mean, I had proved that to myself. It wasn't just an idea like when I was a kid. It was like, sure, it makes sense, and it's obvious, but it was deeper, or at least it was, I don't know, more cognizant. But basically, I just said, okay, not only does God exist, which I already knew, but it's been proven to me so many times, but God is aware of me as an individual and is active in my life and helping sort of guide my life or draw me into certain things. This is an active thing. And that's when this realization hit me. I thought, oh my God, God knows who I am, obviously, very clearly and intimately, but I have no idea who God is. What is God? Who is God? That's when I turned into trying to make it a personal sort of two-way relationship. Rather than, before it was about just me sort of wanting knowledge or wanting discovery or wanting power or wanting, just sort of to know and understand. But this actually is when I started to have some sort of emotion behind it, or like a relationship, or it's a different quality of connection at that point. And so I ended up really gravitating towards meditation practice because I found that meditation helped me develop my intuition. And the mind is here we are talking on technology. The mind has done incredible. What an amazing tool, right? The mind. Oh my goodness! It's just like people specialize in just the amazingness of the brain and the mind and how it all works, consciousness, the nature of it, where does it live, and how does it engage through the physical world. But I think some people, they don't think there's a God because everything seems random and chaotic and unfair, and I know that behind everything that we see, everything that's manifested, there's an unmanifested blueprint, behind that. Before it's real, it's already planned, at some level. I'm using architectural terminology here as I'm comfortable with. But we live in a world governed by laws of cause and effect. Newton's first law. That for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that works not just in physical world, but also in the metaphysical world. And so all the seeming chaos that's going on in the world, it's just that our brains are not big enough. The computer is not large enough to calculate the trillions of cause-effect relationships that are already in motion around us. We can only grasp a limited section of the cause-effect relationships, and all that other stuff that's out there, that's so much bigger than us. That's what we would call chaos. That is the part that we can't calculate. So the mind simply can't do it. It's like showing up to a board cutting contest with a hammer. It's like a hammer is a good tool. It's a fantastic tool, but it's the wrong tool for this particular task. And so the intuition, however, is suited to grasping cause-effect relationships out of that field that you haven't physically or mentally come into direct experience with. Like for instance, intuition can let you know about an event that's happening some other place on the planet. You can get a hit on this thing. Oh, your radio signal can pick it up, and you haven't ever been to that place, or you don't know what's, it's like, and so that's intuition. The mind can't do that. The mind can help you process the data that your intuition is bringing in, but it's not the mind itself that's making that connection. And so meditation is about learning how to identify the things that suddenly spontaneously come into my brain, or the vibrations that I suddenly feel, the emotions I feel. What's the source of that? Is that me responding to something here? Is that a seed that was planted, in my subconscious? Where are these signals coming from? The clarity of meditation helps you understand the difference between what's a thought, what's a feeling, and what's intuition, or what's biological. What's your physical organism, your gut saying. The stomach is your first brain. So there's all these, that mind-body connection thing. So I wanted to get clarity. At the time I was in my early 20s, or my late teens and early 20s, and when I was going through this development, and I made the decision that I was going to stop drinking alcohol, and I was going to stop smoking marijuana, and I was going to stop smoking cigarettes, and I was going to practice meditation and try to live tuned conscious existence so that I could be sensitive to things and not have the distortion. Because I found that if I was, if I was having fun and having a little bit of alcohol or having a little a toke of marijuana, there's nothing wrong with that. But I found that it clouded my ability or distorted my ability to really identify the source of my own signals. That's really the spiritual side of things, and it's just gone from there. It's about cultivating the intuition and through meditation. To answer your question, I know, sorry, that was kind of a long story, and very sort of philosophical, but that's the best I have.
So I think spirituality is a long story. I mean, I used to think you were this or that, and now I realize in my later years, it's a long story. It develops, it changes, it flows. And obviously, I would say you have a sensitivity, you get direct contact, whether you call it that or not. How does all of that play into what you're bringing as a new way of seeing conscious design?
What works for me, it's, I don't... I don't really go out and preach, I'm not looking to convert people to my way of thinking, or my way of living. So as an architect, I've helped people from many different religious backgrounds or no religious backgrounds, atheist. And it's just fine. I don't say, hey, you have to have this or that or the other thing, It's not my place. My place is to ask questions. Ask the right questions. The quality of your question determines the quality of your results, your outcome. So if you ask good questions, you get good results. So, I ask questions, so the book, the Conscious Home Design book, is really, outlines the method, the big ideas, the things that really move the needle in terms of our happiness universally, statistically, based on data, science. But then also the workbook. The companion that goes with that is about exercises and taking the ideas there and applying them into your own situation, so you can sort of do a self-assessment of your own life and say, hey, here are my strong points, here are my gaps, do I want to make any shifts or changes? If you have a framework to follow, then it helps you, not be so haphazard or you got to get lucky, it reduces the amount of trial and error and increases the likelihood of success. When you follow a recipe, right? It's like, sure, you can make it up as you go along in the kitchen, and some people are better than others at doing that. But if you have a recipe, it's going to shortcut the amount of failed attempts, and get you something good faster. And so that's why we consult with experts. And so the Conscious Home Design book and workbook are a recipe to help you dive into your own life. And so I don't say, hey, what do you think about God in my book? I just say, what do you like to do for personal development? What does inner growth look like for you? Is that professional? Is that you wanting to get better at your some skill? Are you trying to learn I don't know, speed reading? Are you trying to learn how to be a better writer, about being creative writing, or whatever. Or is that, do you have a meditation practice, or do you want a prayer room, or whatever. So I just ask the questions, and it's up to you to tell me what's going to help you live happily ever after. So that's my practice, is I just ask questions, and when you tell me what you want and the vision for the life you want to create for yourself, because the ability to control your environment is the ability to control your destiny or shape your future to some degree. And so, as you tell me what the future you that you want to experience, or you want to become, or you want to be, then my job is to translate those thoughts and ideas and feelings and experiences into a three-dimensional built environment that will support and encourage and give you the opportunity to have those experiences. Not to say you have to have this and X and the other experience. It's just saying we know that if you have, an element of creative expression, an element of personal development and growth, an element of love and belonging and feeling like you're connected with others, beyond just needs for the body of food and shelter, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen. We also have higher needs according to Maslow, the hierarchy of human needs pyramid, that need to be supported, or at least in conscious home design, they need to be supported, because homes need to be more than just shelter, I believe. I think a home is actually, because we're spending so much time there, Our home is actually one of the most powerful personal development tools we have available to us if we design it intentionally and if we're aware of that. So I ask those questions if people are interested in creating opportunities in those ways for themselves.
So bring that down to a couple of practical examples. If you're creative, you need certain light, maybe more windows, maybe a little space within the space, things like that.
So we can go a little out of order in these points, but because you jumped into light and specific spaces. I work with something that I call the sunny window effect. It's a term I coined. As a kid, I noticed that when there was a beam of sunlight coming in through the window, I may be sitting there reading a book or playing a game or doing homework or whatever, and then a cloud would come and then the room would get dim, and then the cloud would pass and suddenly the room would illuminate again. And I found that, no matter how beautifully decorated a space might be, when the sun is streaming in, it's that much extra. It's that much more welcoming and inviting. And even the family pets, whether it was the dog or the cat, if there was a sunny patch on the floor in a room, that's where they were. They would always curl up right in the sun. Like light is life. We're inherently attracted to it. Hillary, if you're trying to build a habit or a routine, you say, well, these are the things that are important to me. If I could do this and this and this every day or every week, or, you try to create the lifestyle, the day-to-day flow that you want. And that's going to involve whatever it is, a certain amount of time in the kitchen cooking at certain times of day, certain meals you're preparing, certain amount of times, doing your creative expression activities, certain amount of time working in your office, certain amount of times doing personal development, whatever your routine looks like. If you find that, every New Year's I find myself resetting the same old goal because I never am able to maintain it. It's like, it might not be your fault. It might be the environment. The friction of your environment is so great that establishing the habit or the routine is very difficult. So, if you find that, hey, I said I wanted to do a creative writing practice and develop that, so where I'm spending 30 minutes a day, writing and journaling just to try to, download some of my thoughts and feelings onto paper. Whether it's just for yourself or whether it's for, something to share ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's just the fact is this is the routine, that I want to establish. And if you find that you're not doing it, then I might say, okay, can we find a room with a sunny window at the time where you want to do it? Because if you go to there and do it, then the environment is going to give you a little lift and help overcome a little bit of that friction. It takes willpower to do some things, sometimes. And so you can use the cycles of nature and the natural draw we have towards it to help encourage us and reduce the effort it would take to do that. So you can do that with any activity you want. I just use the creative writing as an example. Put your desk in a sunny window and then write and see how that changes things. If it makes it a little easier for you to get over that hurdle, the resistance of sitting down to write in the first place. I also like to put the kitchen in the southeast corner, if possible. If we're in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, it's the northeast corner. Grandma always said that breakfast was the most important meal of the day. And, if we're feeling pressed for time and a kitchen is in a dark closet, there's no sun or no life in there, then we're just going to quickly run in and run out as fast as possible to get on with our day. But if our kitchen is nice and bright and sunny and inviting, it's like, well, we might spend actually 5 or 10 minutes longer in there and prepare a proper, nutritious meal. And over years, that's going to serve us very well to have that kind of nutritional regularity and support in our life. When you're younger, you can eat, the body can recover from a less healthy diet more easily. But as we age, we really need to be more sensitive about food routines that we do. If I'm building a home from scratch, I always look for the opportunity to put the kitchen in the southeast or somewhere where it's going to have good sun. So these are some practical things about the sunny window and light, but not everyone is going to be hiring an architect and can build a home from scratch and put their kitchen in the southeast, right? When I was writing the book, Conscious Home Design, I was, doing my math and doing my research, and I told you, I got rid of the 42 different ideas and I boiled it down to 12. And so now I ended up with a book that you could read in an hour. It was very accessible, not a lot of jargon. Like I think there's a quote by Mark Twain. He was writing a letter to a friend. He said, "I would have wrote you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time." Editing takes a lot of time. It's hard work. And so I put in the work, to create something that was extremely accessible and easy to grasp. And as I was, trying to decide and filter out how to get rid of 30 chapters, that are all worth talking about, but how do I come up with the 12 that are the most critical to talk about? Yeah. One of them revolved around the Harvard study of adult happiness. And it's the largest of its kind in the world and the oldest too. It started in 1938 and it's still going on today. It's like 88 years later this thing is going. They studied thousands of individuals and they did an initial intake. Hey, who are you? What do you think? What's your health like? What's your background? What are your plans for the future? A full assessment. Do they come from opportunity and wealth? Do they come from poverty and strife? Where are they going? And so they did a full snapshot, an avatar of each individual, and they tracked them through their whole lives, and periodically would get them back and re-update and do a new sort of and see how things are shaping up for them. And what they found, and so all the original participants have passed on now, after 88 years, and they were all over 18, college age, when they began. So they're on to second and third generations now. But what they have found is that throughout the ups and downs of life and the challenges that everyone has in their own way, whether they were health challenges or career changes or business success or failures and setbacks, all those things matter. What mattered the most in terms of people's life expectancy and how happy they said they reported, were the quality of their relationships and their connections, And when I came across that, I said, okay, stop the press. This is, we need to spend some time here, because they said that that's the single biggest predictor of life expectancy and feelings of fulfillment. Like, yes, I have a rich life. So I said the highest aim of architecture is to help people live happily ever after. And here it is. Here's what that means. It means connections. It means relationships. What can architecture do to foster and support and encourage relationships? Because that's really going to, really improve life. Yes, it's nice to live in a sexy, good-looking home, that has wow factor. That feels good, but it's not ultimately what gives you the real joy and the happiness. And so let's give you a beautiful home, but let's also make sure that we include the good stuff, the deeper stuff as well. We'll start there, and then we'll make it beauty. We'll start with a solid framework, and of the things that we know, help people live their best life, and then on top of that, we'll hang all the decoration and ornamentation and beauty and tactility and your style, your design tastes will be on that. So that, because you don't want to end up buying, for instance, the most beautiful, awesome, stylish pair of shoes that happen to be 3 sizes, too big or too small, because that's no good for you. Your home could be like a museum, but if it doesn't flow for you, then it's not a good home, right? So we want to make sure that it flows first and then is beautiful. So you want to make sure that we, get the style you want, but in your size, so to speak. So the Harvard study was very clear that relationships was not limited to, your romantic partnerships. So if you're single, you can still have a long, happy life. So I decided, okay, I've got to spend some time, studying, I'm an architect, but I have to study relationships now and start diving into this. And I had already done a lot of relationship work because I'm interested in having good relationships myself. My own personal growth things have brought me through a number of the greatest books, the Gottman Institute and Attachment Theory and, love languages and, Mars and Venus and all these things. I'd done a number of relationship reading research for my personal stuff, but now I really wanted to start looking at it professionally to see if it was a way that I could enrich the lives of clients. In some way. I mean, I'm an architect. I need to stay in my lane. I'm not a therapist or a coach or a counselor or, a psychologist or any of these things. So I can't, I'm not qualified to really do those things. But I want to let what we know from the science of human excellence, from these other disciplines, somehow influence architecture in some way. The professions can benefit from communication. Interdisciplinary communication, helps us all. If architects are just designing in a bubble of all they know is architecture, and there's no connection to, to what all the other disciplines are learning about life, then that's not good. Those styles change and new technologies change of smart homes and thermostats. We're largely still building homes the way we did, like in the 1900s. It's like 50, same, this many bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room. It's like still the same floor plan. Conscious home design is helping to bring architecture into the 21st century in that way. So as I found out about relationships, there's so much to know. I mean, it's just huge. I mean, all the myriad ways, the Greeks have 7 different words for love, depending on how, if it's between parent and child or two friends, or is it between lovers, or is it between a person in their community, and they have all these different words, storge and eros and filial and agape and et cetera, et cetera. And that was interesting, but I wanted to keep going deeper. And what I found is that all the myriad diverse kinds of relationships that we have are, for the sake of understanding and creating that formula, that recipe. When you can measure something, when you can identify and measure it, then you can actually begin to you can establish your baseline and you can start to make progress. And so as an architect, as a systems thinker, as someone who creates structure, this was essential for me to do. So I found that all of our relationships fall into one of 3 categories, 3 broad buckets, so to speak. Those are our giving, our receiving, and our reciprocal relationships. And so examples of giving relationships are ones where we show up as the initiator of giving. We're the primary giver. Those are ones where we have people that we're coaching or mentoring, perhaps children that we're babysitting or raising or teaching. That even extends to plants and animals, pets, or even if you have a bird feeder outside, that's a giving relationship that you're cultivating. Reciprocal relationships are ones like you and I are having right now, Hillary, where it's just 2 people showing up from their own perspectives and they're having, heartfelt conversation. It's not like if I'm showing up as a teacher or as if I'm parenting, where I have to have a role model face on. I have to be sort of a persona of best behavior kind of thing. I can just speak from the heart. I can let my hair down. It's much more give and take. It's a different flavor of relationship. So those are the ones that we're going to have with, obviously with our friends and colleagues and family and anyone where there's a give and take and a reciprocal type of exchange. And then our receiving relationships are the ones where we are the beneficiary of someone else's care and wisdom and love and encouragement. And so the relationships that we have with our teachers or coaches or mentors, perhaps with our parents and elders and ancestors, even with our religious figures, spiritual figures, or sports heroes or any kind of hero, someone that's going to encourage us to stretch a little bit or reach into our possibility, into our potential, help us, remind us that yes, we can aspire to see a new part of ourselves, because we all want, I know we all want certain structure and stability, and routine and safety, but if we only had that, life is very boring. We all want possibility. We all want to feel like we're growing a little bit, like we're having something new, like there's a new stretch, it's inherent to us, because I believe that we all have that spark of the unlimited, the infinite universe implanted in us. So the body wants safety and structure, but our spirit wants no limitations. We want to feel like we have room to grow, room to experience and expand into more things, more possibilities. And so people that inspire us or teach us keep those doors open for us, keep the doors open. So we want to have, all 3 kinds of relationships in our lives. And as we go through the journey of life, we're going to experience different ratios. When you're young, when you're college age, you're going to be having a lot of receiving relationships from all your professors. And in any free time you have, you're going to have a lot of reciprocal relationships, hanging out with your buds, hanging out with your friends, right? Not a lot of giving relationships at that age. It's just fine. It's the way it is. It's natural. But soon after, most people end up settling down and starting a family. And then if they got young children, they're going to be giving all the time, 24/7 for years. And, it may be just, there may be a period where they're just like, oh, if I could only get an extra hour just to have an adult conversation, I really am desperate for some reciprocal, time, And so everyone needs to find the balance for themselves. And everyone, whether they're introverted or extroverted or whatever their personal formula is for feeling like they're satisfied in their relationships, when through the course of life, you want to have that balance, whatever that looks like for you. And so conscious home design, I said, well, what would it look like if we intentionally shaped our homes so that they supported all three types of relationship, so that you had opportunity for a giving, a receiving, and a reciprocal relationship built in to your home? What would that do for you? I like to use an example of the most famous painting in the world, Hillary. And this is the pop quiz. What do you think? What's the most famous painting in the world?
I would almost think it would be Van Gogh.
Google says that it's the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci. So apparently, it turns out that the Mona Lisa turned 500 years old recently. So by now, everyone's heard of it, in the world. As I was studying, art history as one of my, adjacent things as a designer, I learned that Da Vinci, it took him more than a decade to paint that. He worked on it little by little. And some estimates say 15 to 17 years. I just conservatively say, well, it was more than 10. So it took him at least 10 years to paint that. Regardless of whether it was 10 or 15, it still illustrates this concept that when we are able to dedicate space to an activity, it gives us the chance to do that activity and perform it. Seth Godin said it takes 10,000 hours to become, to get mastery in something. And we all know that sort of intuitively makes sense. Sure, practice makes perfect. It takes time and effort to become, good at something or to do anything really. But what's missing from the common sense formula is it also takes space. If Da Vinci did not have an art studio where, when he got called away to another project, a paying commission, or when he had, inspiration to do something, he could store the Mona Lisa and then come back to it when he had time or inspiration and work on it a little bit more. Without that art studio, it may never have happened. Like without architecture to dedicate space to our activities, we wouldn't be able to accomplish much of anything that took longer than a sunny afternoon, because as soon as the weather changed or night came and wild animals came or hostile neighbor tribes or whatever, they'd mess everything up, right? So architecture, the ability to control our environment, allows us to build on yesterday's achievements, whether it's science or technology or art, anything really. Architecture is in large part responsible for helping us develop all the wonderful things we've done as humans. When we dedicate space, we give ourselves, we have an exponential better chance of success. So the relationships, it's like, okay, how can we dedicate space, for these opportunities? Because the relationships are the single biggest predictor of our happiness and health. And so I took it one step further. I said, let's not just make sure that every home has opportunity for a giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationship, but what would it look like if every room in the home, is it possible for every room to support all three kinds of relationship? And this is where the rubber meets the road, Hillary. This is where ideas and thoughts and sort of theories actually become practical and turn into real things that anyone listening, can start to put to work for them. I like to use as an example a room that people typically do not think of as a relationship generating, a relationship building space, and that is the bathroom. The bathroom is typically a private space. It's where we go to take care of the body and do our business. It may be a place where we, if we do have young children and we just need a 5-minute break, we can go and be alone. Or if if you're at a party and it's a little bit, too much overstimulating, and you just need to go recenter your energy and take a deep breath for a minute, you can go be alone in the bathroom. It really is a private space, but it's also extremely rich and fertile ground to strengthen your sense of connection at the same time. So examples of giving relationship in the bathroom. If you happen to have a window to the outside, an exterior window, then by all means, bring in a plant or two. Put it on the windowsill or on a little shelf nearby, or hang it from the top, and get some some life. You take one step into making it, instead of a dead utility space, make it one step towards being a garden or an oasis for yourself. And if you don't have a window, then put in a full spectrum light bulb. There are many plants that do just fine with that kind of light. It's very low maintenance. You're building this relationship, a giving relationship. But once a week, take 3 steps from the sink to the plant and give it some water. And maybe prune off a dead leaf and say hello, plant. And there, now there's life happening. And not only are you cultivating a giving relationship, but it's also good for us physiologically. When we see green growing things, the mind calms, the breath gets more deep, and the heart rate, the resting heart rate, drops, and blood pressure lowers. This is a physiological response that we have because our bodies evolved in nature, not in buildings. And so when we see green growing things, it sends subtle cues to our being, to our organism, that hey, you're in your natural environment, and stress levels go down when we see that. Whereas if we're in a completely foreign, we didn't evolve in offices, or buildings. So even if it's a beautiful space and well decorated, it doesn't have the same physiological response. It may be pleasing to the intellect, to the eye, but it doesn't have that calming effect that nature does. So I'm a big proponent of stuff plants into your home, put them everywhere, because it has good effect, beyond just the giving relationship. So taking it one step further, what about putting a little fish bowl in your bathroom if there's space, and have a goldfish in there, or a betta fish with the nice fins flapping around, and so you can come in the morning and be like, hi fish, and sprinkle food on there and brush your teeth, and it's like there's life, it's a little spark of joy in your bathroom, possibly if that suits for you. So those are very easy giving relationships that you can create. Reciprocal relationships. A little bit more work there, but we see it frequently in master bathrooms where there's 2 sinks, side by side, a double bowl, so you can, wash your face or brush your teeth, next to someone you're cohabitating with. If your lifestyle suits, if you got the space and you want it, why not put a big soaking tub big enough for 2? It's very relaxing. It can be romantic, and it's a nice thing to do if you choose that for your lifestyle. And just, for efficiency's sake, what about a shower room that has 2 heads? So instead of having to take turns, you can both, shower at the same time. And, it doesn't have to be sexy time. It's just something you can do, together in proximity, and it's just about building a routine into your life. So those are some reciprocal relationship opportunities in a bathroom. Receiving relationships. Well, I think we can all take an image of someone that we know loves us, or someone that inspires us and encourages us to be our best, and put that up somewhere in the bathroom where you can see it. I know that it becomes very routine. I know how to brush my teeth. I can do it on autopilot. I don't have to think about doing it. So while I can multitask, while I'm brushing my teeth, I can be working through my to-do list for the day. I can be composing an email or thinking about this meeting that I have to do or whatever it is, and so there's nothing wrong with that kind of multitasking, I think. But you can also just take 3 seconds of that time and gaze at that image and say, someone wants the best for me. So someone cares about me. And, how does that change how you feel, how you show up, how you stand on your own 2 feet? What sort of ripples is that going to send out into your day, into the world? And over time, over years, if we go through the house, all this, and just make little 2% shifts, the butterfly effect, the mathematician, he said, he wrote a paper, did the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Brazil eventually set off a tornado in Texas? And so, he proved that big results have sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Not all little things become big things, but all big things started as little things. And so if you want anything big in your life, start small, intentionally. That's the butterfly effect. And these are butterfly initial conditions that we can set up for ourselves. Harvard has given us the math. We all say, oh, yes, I do everything for my family. Oh, connection time with my friends is the most important thing to me. We all say that. We intuitively know that this is true. But without the math and the data to show it and prove it and support it, those things remain on our wish list. Oh, I wish I had more time for this or that. But when we see the math proves that no, if you have those things, if you prioritize those things, you'll actually, statistically, you'll live longer. Look, maybe it's too prominent. Maybe you don't want to have a picture of your mom, in the bathroom, looking at you, right? Or maybe you're Jewish and your partner is Catholic, or whatever the, thing is, and you don't want to you can't agree to both have Christ on the, Jesus, a picture of Jesus in your bathroom. Then just find a quote that's personally meaningful to you, and choose your own adventure. You can have your quote and I'll have my quote, and you can, have those in place. It's very subtle, but it still gives you a moment to just have almost like an affirmation. Just repeat that for 3 to 5 seconds and still do your multitasking, and still do, not much has to change in your routine, but taking these intentional moments is the alchemy. It's the secret sauce. Like, I know that when I worked out in the gym with my personal trainer, he says to me, look, don't just do the exercise and be thinking about something else. Don't pay attention to what you're doing. He said, put 100% of your focus and concentration and awareness on the muscle groups that we're working right now. And that mind-body connection gets you, and I, in 6 months, I made more progress than 3 years on my own, with his guidance. And so that's what we're doing in our life. Just putting a plant and a picture of a loved one in your house is probably not going to change your life. But if you do it intentionally and remind yourself of that relationship and daily or weekly or regularly, kindle the conscious connection of that relationship, that does have an impact. That does change your life.
So we've hit an hour, and I'm going to go over because I know I'll clip a little bit here and there. But I wanted to wrap this up. If somebody was going to come to you and ask you to build a house for them, how would you begin? With the same questions you're talking about?
Yeah. So in the workbook, it's an assessment. You start with, who you are, where you are. You already have the things that you want, and you probably have a few things that you don't want because you've experienced it in the past and it's not successful. And so you're like, hey, I want to avoid this, but I want these things. And we start there, and then I ask other questions that maybe you didn't think of to ask. I mean, maybe you weren't aware, I could ask that. Right, what a good idea. And so it's really just about an assessment, a discovery. And that's the process. And the truth is, anyone can do that, even if they're not going to hire me. That's where we start. Conscious home design is not all or nothing. We meet you where you are. Do a self-assessment and find your gaps and see. And because once you know where you are and then where you want to be, then we can plot the journey to connect the dots to get there. And that is the process. Whether they're working directly with me or not, that is the methodology that is successful.
Interesting. So I have another question.
Sure.
I live in the desert.
Yes.
And very, very different than the East.
Right.
A lot of us have bought land and homestead cabins. But what we're all very conscious of is affordable housing. And people
Sure.
are moving into the area. They're changing things. They're coming with big money. They're building one house after another. They're taking the space away. Where do you see architecture going with your overview of, I would say, love, receptivity, communication, community, with all those things? How do you see the world going?
Well, world peace, let it begin with me. So there's a little bit of top-down, policies that influence things, and there's a little bit of bottom-up, what do people actually want and desire. And so it work in any level of influencing policy, it's not where I am in this profession. So my job is just to connect with individuals that want to create their version of life. And, there's something... what was it called? The 100th Monkey. There was a book that came out, the 100th Monkey Effect. And so it's like, okay, great. You just work with, when enough individuals, maybe it shifts some sort of collective consciousness, and then everyone says, oh, okay, right, I get it, and think globally, act locally. I believe that happy people are better neighbors, and so if I give people the opportunity to live a connected life, a life that feels full of possibility, I have opportunities for personal development and growth, as well as, meaningful interactions with other people, then these people suddenly have room to feel for others. Like when you're struggling for survival, you don't really care if the food you're getting is organic because you're starving. You just need to have some calories, right? But once you can attain a certain level of your basic needs are met, you can lift your head up and look around and say, am I being a good neighbor? Am I being a good citizen? And you can start to have a greater awareness. And so conscious home design helps people live a fuller, richer life for themselves. And I believe that it's a natural result of living that way. They start to become a better person, a better citizen, a better neighbor. And one at a time, that's how the world shifts. It's not my job to change the world. It's just my job to help someone create their best life. And then the changing of the world happens naturally, automatically as a result of that.
That's great. This has been a wonderful conversation.
There's a lot more in the practice. I touched on Maslow's, and we talked about the relationships, but it goes deeper.
I know personally, and just to wrap this up quickly, I had the opportunity to build this place. So I took that homestead cabin in the garage and I made them really beautiful little rooms, basically, and add the container. And what I always knew is I needed adaptability for my art, because as I changed what I was doing, then one room might become another room.
Sure.
What I hadn't thought about is I built it for one person, although I had an idea. I put in that room you're talking about, the bathroom. Mm-hmm. I have a dressing room. I put the toilet separate, made a dressing room, and put 2 sinks.
Okay.
And I have a great big shower, so there's nothing confining me.
Sure.
But what I didn't expect is all of a sudden I got a partner. So now one room houses 2 people who work from home.
See, Hillary, nature abhors a vacuum. And if you build a bathroom big enough for 2, nature's going to send you someone. That's what you you did it. You called it in. Yes? Very
Absolutely.
Good. Congratulations.
But that's the adaptability. Like all of a sudden you're dealing with a whole nother person in a relatively small space.
It's challenging. Mm-hmm.
It's very challenging, and we're both big personalities. So
sure.
And so there's so much to look at with design, but it's very exciting to hear your ideas and where you're coming from. That gives me great faith for the future.
Oh, great. Yes, I enjoy conversations with amazing people too. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast tour. The chances of someone listening to the podcast and calling me up and saying, hey, will you be my architect? It might happen, planting seeds. But it's more about me keeping my faith and optimism high, too, because if I'm just looking at the news, it's pretty ugly. But if I can have these conversations with other people that are creative and intentional and want love and mindfulness in their reality, then we're building a network. We're building a web. And we realize, oh wow, the world is full of good news.
It is. And so my idea for Driftwood Conversations was community, communication, and possibilities. And now I have live events happening too, where we can choose different topics to look at and give input. And this is a small town, so it's very possible to do things like that. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, I'm happy to do, a workshop with you or with your audience, with your, sort of a Hillary Sloan exclusive, just for your tribe. We can do a 3-hour Saturday afternoon Zoom, like a conscious home makeover. People can, we'll do the workbook and they can have time saying, oh, I want to work on this space. I want to work on my office, or I want to work on my family room or my bedroom or whatever. And then I did the workbook exercises, and this is what I'm thinking. This is the direction I'm wanting to go on that. Can you give me some, they can pick my brain or have some consulting time, and we can have some fun with that if there's a need for for it. Happy to set something up.
I love the idea. We'll have to brainstorm on it. But for right now, how do people reach you? How do they get your book? Give
Sure.
me your website, all of that information.
Yeah, so people can order the book through their local bookstore if they want. Get a hard copy, or their online, whatever their online retailer is, Barnes and Noble or Amazon or whatever. You can also get it on my website. On my website, conscioushomedesign.com. You can get an instant downloadable copy of the book, the audiobook, and the workbook for $47, I think, at the moment it is. You can also get a physical copy, and I'll sign it and mail it to you. And when you buy that one, you'll also get the digital copy to immediately download as well. And so that's exclusive on the website. If you go through the bookstore or online or physical bookstore, you can only get the book. You can't get the workbook that goes with it. So if you want the workbook to take those ideas and start seeing what it would look like for you, then visit my website, conscioushomedesign.com.
Great. Thank you so much
Oh, you're welcome.
for reaching out and being on this podcast. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Talor, thank you. This was such a rich conversation, and I can feel there's a lot more we could explore. What I'm taking away now is the reminder that conscious design isn't about having money or having the right style. It's about noticing what supports you, what creates friction, and what helps you live the life you keep saying you want. And I really love the way Talor kept bringing it back to relationships as something we can actually design for. If you want to find out more about Talor Stewart, his book is Conscious Home Design. His website is conscioushomedesign.com. And if this episode touched something in you, I'd love it if you shared it with a friend, especially someone who's building a life, reshaping a home, or trying to make their everyday environment feel more supportive. Thanks for listening to Driftwood Conversations. I'm Hillary Sloan, and I'll see you next time.